What if life after menopause wasn't something to fear or dread, but instead a vibrant, empowering chapter where you can truly thrive physically, mentally, and emotionally? What if your healthiest, most fulfilling, and even most pleasurable years were still ahead of you? Today's guest is here to help us reframe the narrative around post-menopause and unlock the potential of this next phase. Welcome to Pleasure in the Pause, a podcast dedicated to inspiring midlife women to feel more connected to their bodies, pleasure, and power through perimenopause, menopause, and beyond. I am your host, Gabriella Espinosa, women's health and sexual wellness coach, and it is my pleasure to be here with you. Joining us today is Nicki Williams, an award-winning nutritionist, author, and speaker, and a leading expert in women's health and hormones. Nicki's personal journey began in her early 40s when she faced her own health struggles and found herself searching for answers that traditional medicine didn't provide. Her determination led her to discover the transformative power of natural solutions through diet, lifestyle changes, and supplements. Today, Nikki is the founder of Happy Hormones for Life, a thriving platform that empowers women to rebalance their hormones, reclaim their vitality, and feel better than ever. Nicki's latest book, Life After Menopause, Embrace Your Next Chapter with a Healthy Body and Mind, is a must-have guide to thriving in the uncharted years beyond menopause. Packed with science-based insights and her signature Embrace protocol, the book offers women a roadmap to health, energy, and joy in midlife and beyond. I am so thrilled to have Nikki on the show today to share her wisdom, and I know you're going to walk away feeling informed, inspired, and empowered. Let's welcome Nikki to Pleasure in the Pause. Welcome, Nikki. It's so lovely to have you here with me today.
Thank you so much, Gabriella. It's lovely to be here.
Nikki, your journey into hormone health began with your own struggles in your early 40s. Can you share with our audience more about that turning point and how it shaped your approach to women's health and hormone balance?
Yeah, like many health practitioners, I started off with a personal struggle. It wasn't super severe, but in my early 40s, I had a very heavy corporate job, a lot of responsibility. I was commuting to and from work, and I had two young children, about 6 and 8. I just felt like life was just one big struggle. It was a massive to-do list. You know what it's like? We're trying to juggle all the plates and do everything the best we can. And I wasn't doing anything very well at all. I didn't feel like I was doing very well at work. I certainly wasn't being my best self as a mum or a wife. I just felt like I was exhausted. I was stressed out. I had brain fog, so I kept forgetting things at work as well. And I really felt like I was failing at everything, really. And I felt physically exhausted too. And I thought, gosh, something must be wrong with me. I don't know what it is, but I'll go to the doctor and talk to him about it. And I sat in the doctor's office for 10 minutes and I hear, and you have heard a million stories just like this, but I reeled off my symptoms, and there may have been a tear or two because, you know, it's frustrating not being able to live your best life and feel good. But that obviously led to a prescription with Prozac written on it, which was the antidepressant of the day. Now, this was about 17 years ago, so a long time ago. And back then, there was no awareness around menopause, hormones, anything. So at 42, my doctor just assumed I was depressed. Now, I looked at that and thought, that's really weird. It shocked me, actually. So I thought, no, hang on, no, it wasn't even on my radar that it was depression, because I've never had that before. It wasn't in my family. It's not something that I really intuitively thought that it was that. So I thought, what do I do next? What do I do now? Now, luckily for me, I have a dad who was and still is a bit working as a hormone doctor. So he'd been a doctor for many years. He specialized in hormones, menopause, the whole bioidentical hormone thing. I knew nothing about any of that. I was in a corporate job, so I didn't know anything about health, and I really didn't know what he did. I just assumed it was doctory. So I rang him up. I said, Dad, you don't want to know all the symptoms, but my doctor wants to put me on this antidepressant. And he said, no, Nick, from what you've told me, it's perimenopause. You're 42. And I looked at him and went, what on earth is that word for a start? Because nobody had heard of that word 17 years ago. That just didn't exist. I heard menopause, and all I knew about menopause was that you had to be old and grey and past your prime, and that I was in my 40s. I had a regular cycle. I had young children. I was working, blah, blah, blah. That wasn't me. So I just went a blank look and I went, what are you talking about? And you know what? He gave me the education that I never got at school. I didn't get from doctors. The doctors probably didn't know that much more than I did, to be honest, about female hormones and female health. I was blown away. My mind was blown in terms of how we don't know what's going on in our own bodies. I had no clue that this was happening, that this was going to happen to me. And it was leading up to something. And this was the whole perimenopausal transition. And the more I found out about it from him, the more fascinated I was. On one hand, I was really fascinated and wanted to learn more. On the other hand, I was getting angrier about the fact that we didn't know this stuff. And none of my friends knew it either because they were all struggling in different ways. And that got me quite angry and thinking, why are we not told this? Why don't we have the tools? Why are we relying on doctors who also don't really know much about this either? And the more I got into it, the more I realized I've got to do something about this. I've got to tell other people. I've got to educate other women, just like my dad did, because not everyone has a dad that can do that for them. Before I went and made that rash decision, he did explain the sort of things that I needed to be doing to now manage my perimenopause and look after my hormones, none of which I was really doing very well. Some tweaks to my diet, lifestyle, taking a few extra supplements. Honestly, within a few weeks, made a huge amount of difference. My brain fog lifted, my energy came back, my mood started to balance out, and I just felt like me again. And it was quite radical, actually. And I thought, hang on a minute, I'm not taking any medication. I'm doing some stuff. Yeah, I'm changing a few things, but it's not rocket science. And it's certainly not too difficult. So I was like, we need to know about this stuff, because if it can make this much of a difference in my life, then it's going to make a difference in other women's lives as well. So that's when I made the decision to give up my corporate role and go back to college. And for the next 4 years, I studied nutrition and hormones and started Happy Hormones for Life in 2014, which is now 10 years ago. And for the last 10 years, we've been helping women, educating women, empowering them, giving them the tools they need to manage that transition and beyond, because there's so much more that I've learned since my 50s, that so much more than hormones in terms of feeling your best and looking good. That's where we are.
Such an inspiring story and resonates so much with my own journey. And I was lucky to find you and your book, your first book, It's Not You, It's Your Hormones, which was published in 2017. You were mentioning perimenopause and menopause in this book before perimenopause gained the awareness it has today. And for many women, especially those in their 30s and early 40s, it can be a big mindset shift, as you so, eloquently reflected in your own personal story, to realize they're approaching this stage while they're managing family or career. How do we get women in this age group to start paying attention to the signs of perimenopause? So for any young women in this 30 to 40 age range, what wisdom do you have to share with them?
There's a lot more information out there than there was when I first wrote that book. So thank goodness for that. But with a lot of information comes confusion and overwhelm, because there's so much information that we have to sift through it and work out what to trust and what's real and what isn't real. So there's that issue. We've gone from no information to too much. But I think the main message is for women in their 30s is to just watch out for your symptoms. Start listening to your body more. Now, before the age of 30, we don't have to worry about what a body's telling you unless it's serious, you've got some kind of condition or something. But if you're generally going through life, you might have a problematic cycle, and you might have the odd hormone imbalance going on, but generally your hormones are pretty good. They're going to be operating pretty well, because they're preparing your body for a baby, whether you like it or not. So they're going to be behaving themselves more or less, unless you're super stressed. If you're super stressed, then the hormones are not going to like that, and they're going to start to show symptoms earlier. But before 30, you can get away with a lot of stuff. You can eat a lot of carbs. You can get away with not moving too much. You can get away with a bit of stress. Your body is very resilient and it's very strong. Now, once you hit 30, towards your mid-30s onwards, your hormones are going to start to fluctuate a little bit, because your reproductive cycle is going to start to wane, because you're going to not ovulate every month necessarily. You're going to start skipping ovulation because your eggs are going to start losing quality, and you're not going to have as many as you did in your 20s. So that's the sort of essential changes that are happening. And because of that lack of or irregular ovulation, then your hormones are going to start to change. Progesterone starts to decline and estrogen starts to fluctuate. leaving a bigger gap between estrogen and progesterone than normally you would get in your 20s. Now, this can have lots of different effects and different symptoms for different women, depending on their genes, depending on their diet, lifestyle, or whatever. But signs to look for: more tiredness, more mood swings, more brain fog, more digestive issues potentially, weight gain, irregular cycles or more difficult cycles, all things like that. I could go on forever about the list of symptoms because hormones affect every part of your body. So you can have lots of different sets of symptoms, but those are some of the ones that most people have. And then just listen for your body and watch out for those kind of symptoms, and then start to really take care of yourself, because that is the sign that you need to start looking after your body. Whereas before we didn't have to worry. Now we really do have to. And that means looking at your diet. It means looking at your lifestyle. Are you moving enough? Are you managing your stress? Exposing yourself to too many chemicals, which can damage your hormones? And really just looking at that whole piece and starting to make slight changes and tweaks, so that the more you do here, the more healthier you get, the more on it you are, the better perimenopause journey you're going to have. And then the better place you're going to be actually from midlife onwards, going into getting older, because there's challenges beyond menopause.
That's great advice. And I love in your first chapter where you're introducing us to our hormones, you put in at the top of your quick tips box, put yourself first. Prioritize rest and relaxation. Oh my gosh, what a foreign concept that is for many of us in our 30s and 40s, when we're doing all the things. We're getting our careers started and trying to go up the corporate ladder or raise children or doing both. It is so difficult to do that. I mean, I think it took me a long time to really set firm boundaries and put myself first and say, just close the door and take a nap, away from all the noise. Why is it so difficult for us to do that? And I don't think we can repeat that enough, right? I hear it all the time. I don't think we can say it enough to women, but how do we get women to just put this at the top of their list like you have?
It's the hardest thing in the world. I've been doing this work for 10 years and I came out of nutrition school thinking, it's diet for everything. So if we change our diet and we eat the best diet and we eat all these healthy, nourishing foods, then we won't have to worry about our hormones. And the more I actually worked with women in clinic, the more women were coming and doing just that. They had the best diets in the world and they were still suffering. It took me a while to work out that the stress piece was actually way more important than the diet. Okay, it's great to have a good diet, but if you're stressed, it's actually not going to make that much of a difference, because stress is your dominant stress hormone. Cortisol is your dominant hormone. And it will take priority over everything else that's happening in the body. Because if your body is in survival mode, it's in fight or flight all day long, which a lot of us are in that state. The body is in survival mode. So all it's going to be doing is putting all its resources into producing cortisol and adrenaline and keeping you wired, not letting you sleep because there's danger at the door, not letting you reproduce. So your sex drive diminishes, you have problems conceiving, periods go all wonky, you're extra fatigued, you're extra moody because cortisol affects your brain cells and your neurotransmitters, and you're just not going to feel good. And every hormone in the body is possibly going to be affected by that extra cortisol. So if you're cortisol driven, nothing in the body is going to work properly, because you're in that survival mode and the resources just aren't there. Okay, so your digestion's going to suffer as well, and your immune system's going to weaken over time. And yes, we are evolved to deal with stress in that way, but we were in this system that we have, this fight or flight, was designed for us to fight the tiger and run away and rest. We'd have spurts of needing cortisol, like through possibly 2 or 3 times a week if we were in danger, not 24/7 like we have in modern life. We're not designed for that type of stress, like micro stresses, as Dr. Chastity calls it, which is a really good way of describing it. It's not the major life or death stress. It's these little micro stresses from the minute your alarm goes off in the morning to getting to work, having a deadline, traffic jams. Every single part of our day can have a micro stress that's putting us in fight or flight. And for women particularly, it's really hard to get out of this process because we have a lot to deal with. And by midlife, we possibly have children, or we're caring for others like parents, or We have reached a very responsible job position at work where we've got more work stress going on. We might have relationship stresses or financial stress. There's a whole lot that we have to deal with in midlife. And the Health and Safety Executive did a report in 2016, I think it was, that midlife women were the most stressed out of every demographic. So we went, yeah, duh, really. We know that, right? So we've got all that stress going on at a time when our bodies are under physical stress already going through the menopause because our hormones are changing. So it's a double whammy stress environment. So it's more important than ever that we realize that and we take action. And when someone says, because I say it all the time, self-care, get some downtime, take some time for yourself. And it's becoming a kind of easy thing to say. And everyone is just washing over people because it's so vague, isn't it? It's so like, lucky if I have time to do that. But if you don't have time to do that, you're not going to live very long, basically. It shortens your life. So if we want a healthy post-menopausal life and we want to live a healthy, longer, happier life for as long as we possibly can, and most of us do, then we have to address cortisol and stress as early as possible. Because, by the way, it's never too late to address it. We can reverse things, whatever age you are. But if you've missed out the stress bit, the self-care in your 20s and 30s, your 40s is the time where you don't actually have a choice. You have to address this. You have to stop. You have to slow down slightly. It doesn't mean slow down in life. It just means slow your brain down, your mind down a little bit, so that you can then break that cortisol addiction and really just switch it off for periods of time each day. And it doesn't have to be sitting down meditating for an hour. You can do 10 to 20 minutes of reading a book that has been shown to reduce your cortisol. Go and sit in a warm bath, have a walk in nature, do whatever it is that actually relaxes you. You can listen to music, you can dance around your kitchen, something that switches off that stress response, but do it every day. It's no good having a holiday once a year or a vacation once a year or having a spa day or a massage once every blue moon, whatever. You've got to do this daily because the stresses that we face are daily. And if we don't do it, we are leaving ourselves open to seriously chronic disease and early death. So I'm going to say that it's not, it's harsh, but it's totally true.
Wow. Thank you for that very clear and concise picture of cortisol. And I do agree. It is like an addiction and it's so hard to switch off. You mentioned in your book that cortisol is one of what you call the Feisty 4 hormones. And again, the book does a great job, just like you've done now, painting this picture of what cortisol does to our body and what we need to do to address this cortisol addiction. Can you explain what some of those other Feisty 4 hormones are and how do these continue to play a role in the perimenopause to menopause transition?
Yeah, now these came about because I was starting to study hormones and I was totally shocked at how many there were. So we've got around about over 100 identified hormones that are running around the body, and they are our chemical messengers that go to every cell of the body and tell them what to do. So they've all got a job. They're all really important. And as I was looking at all these hormones, many of which I'd never heard of, most of them, to be honest, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, there are so many of them. How am I supposed to know what each one does? And as I was studying them, there were 4 that kept coming up over and over again as to how much they did in the body and how important they were. And I thought, okay, this is, instead of like really focusing on a little bit of every single hormone, I'm going to focus on these 4. The more work I did and the more I looked at these 4, they seemed to have a sort of 80-20 thing that's going on. So these 4 seem to be looking after 80% of how we felt and our general health and well-being. So I started to think, okay, so we don't need to know about 100 hormones. We need to really just know about these 4 and how to look after them. Because if we balance these 4, we're going to be in a pretty good way, especially going through perimenopause and beyond. So we've talked about cortisol. That was number 1. The next one is thyroid. Now, thyroid is your metabolism regulator. So it basically is your energy switch for every cell in the body. So if you're low in thyroid hormones, which is hypothyroid, or underactive, as many people call it, you're not producing enough thyroid hormones, which means basically you're not getting enough energy to every part of the body. And that can result in symptoms that often cross over with menopausal symptoms. So it's really important for midlife women to get their thyroid properly checked to make sure it's that and not menopause, because you may be put onto HRT, whereas your sex hormones, your estrogen, progesterone are fine. It's a thyroid problem. So this is why it's really important to not just give everybody HRT if they've got symptoms, and to really work out, okay, let's just check it's not something else, because these symptoms cross over. And if I start talking about some of the symptoms of low thyroid, you'll get it. Fatigue, weight gain, mood swings, anxiety, skin and nails problems, generally feeling low and forgetful, constipation, sometimes because your bowel has not got enough energy to keep it going. Also, low thyroid can result in increased cholesterol, which is another really interesting fact for a lot of women who come back from the doctor saying, oh, I've got high cholesterol. I'm always going to say to them, did they check your thyroid? Because sometimes that's the cause. So we need to check our thyroid and make sure it's okay, because we may need medication, or we may need to look at our thyroid health in general and look at what nutrients we're supplying it with and whether we can support it naturally. So that's thyroid. The next one is insulin. Now, insulin is our blood sugar regulator. Obviously, we produce it from the pancreas to get sugar out of the blood when we eat food, and it goes away. The sugar then goes to the cells. Insulin carries it to the cells to make new energy. Now, what happens as we go through perimenopause is we get a little bit more insulin resistant, which means we just get not very good at letting that glucose into the cells. The cells can put up a brick wall and say, do you know what? I've got enough. You had breakfast a couple of hours ago and you're now giving me a croissant full of sugar, and I'm just going to shut my door and go, no, I've had it. I've got enough. Thank you. So when the cell does that, insulin has to put it somewhere. It's got sugar, it's carrying around, so it goes and stores it in our fat cells. Now, that can be one of the reasons why midlife women gain more weight, is because we are not very good at that anymore and our cells get more resistant. So we've got that going on. We've also got the blood sugar roller coaster going on. So if you are eating a carb-heavy breakfast or lunch or meal or snack, your blood sugar rises. Insulin comes along and in force takes out that blood sugar, because you don't want too much sugar in the blood. It has to come and do that. It's very stressful for the body if not. And then it crashes a couple of hours later because it's done too good a job. And then we're on this roller coaster. So when your blood sugars dip, you've got a craving for something carby or sweet. And then you're moody, you're foggy, you're tired. And then you have that snack or whatever it is. And then you're rising again. And then the blood sugar roller coaster goes on all day. And it can go on into the night as well and cause you sleep problems too. So again, you're going to get symptoms that are a little bit similar to the thyroid and the cortisol. You're going to get brain fog and moodiness and fatigue and weight gain. So there's lots of crossover between these hormones, which is why if you get them all in balance, you're not going to have those symptoms. But if one's out and you've got some symptoms, it's worth checking the others as well, because it could be a mixture, or it could be just one that's really dominant and you've got that imbalance. And the final one is estrogen. Obviously, it's going to be changing, and it works very closely with progesterone and testosterone, but I've lumped them into one little bucket there because they work similarly when we're going through perimenopause. And they're in decline, and they're also fluctuating. So they can cause symptoms too, depending on what time of the month and how high or low they are. So those are the four that, if you know about them and roughly what they do and what to look out for and how to test them, then you're going to know which one might be out of balance and which one to focus on. So knowledge is obviously power, isn't it? So if we know which hormone's playing up and which one we need to focus on, we can get results so much quicker because we can target that particular one. So if we know our cortisol's too high, then we're really got to knuckle down on the stress management. If we know our insulin's playing up and we've got blood sugar symptoms, then we can really focus in on that blood sugar balancing diet and changing out the way we eat carbs. It gives us a lot of power to know that these four hormones, what they do and how they're acting in the body, and what they're telling us is really key.
Yeah, I appreciate that you focus on those particular hormones, because as you mentioned, there's so much crossover with perimenopause and menopause. And it, like you said, it may not be perimenopause or menopause, right? I think right now there's so much awareness with perimenopause and menopause that everyone automatically thinks, oh, I must be in perimenopause. Oh, I must be in perimenopause because I'm experiencing these symptoms, when in fact they could be signs of low thyroid, of high cortisol, of insulin resistance creeping up because of the way we're living our lives. And so exactly what you say in the book, exactly what you've said today, stress is the driver of so much imbalance in those hormones that can lead us to think, I'm in perimenopause. I've been on both sides where I've had thyroid imbalance. I actually had the opposite. I had a hyperthyroid. Didn't know that was happening. When I finally got that under control, I started experiencing the symptoms of perimenopause, but no, doctors weren't testing me for that. They were just looking at my thyroid. They were just looking at my thyroid because I had the history of thyroid imbalance. They're like, your thyroid is fine. Your thyroid is fine. You're fine. But I was experiencing the same symptoms that mimicked perimenopause: heart palpitation, anxiety, irritability, and then the insulin resistance. I was seeing a very good endocrinologist, and he was saying that you're inching your way towards pre-diabetes, so you need to watch that. So there's so much that we need to be aware of, so much knowledge that we need to empower ourselves. But I love that you break it down in such a clear and concise way. Those 4 hormones are fundamental. Given the awareness, it's good that we're having so much awareness around perimenopause and menopause right now. Do you feel there's less emphasis on these Feisty 4 hormones, or would you add any other hormones to this grouping of Feisty hormones today, given how much has changed in the landscape of women's health and the current awareness around perimenopause and menopause?
So, great question. What's actually happened is the awareness about menopause has led people down the path of estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, the sex hormone. So, yes, they are really important. They are the ones that are driving the changes. However, just replacing those hormones, and I talk about this a lot in terms of the HRT conversation, is HRT is not a miracle cure, because it may well be replacing your estrogen, progesterone, and potentially testosterone, although that's controversial and hard to get. But those are the only hormones it can replace, right? So if you've got another hormone imbalance, it's not going to do anything for that. That's just why a lot of women start HRT, because they don't get tested, or the doctors go on their symptoms and they're guessing. So a lot of women will start HRT and go 3 weeks later, go, nothing's happened. I don't feel any, or I might have a minor improvement, but it's not rocked my world. It hasn't changed anything. Or I feel worse. They sometimes feel worse because maybe their hormones were fine and it's just made a difference to something else. So we have this blanket approach to menopause now. We put everybody on HRT in the medical world and don't look at their other hormones. So I think when you said, are they still relevant, these Feisty 4? Yeah, absolutely, because we've got even more emphasis on the sex hormones, and nobody's looking at whether their thyroid is low, whether they're stressed out, or whether they've got some insulin, blood sugar problems. Beyond that, gut issues or nutrient deficiencies or immune system issues. Yes, those 4 need to be brought out even more nowadays than they were back then. The extra awareness is brilliant, and I'm certainly not anti-HRT. I take HRT myself, the body identical version, because actually, let me tell you what happened to me. So in my 40s, I wrote the book about natural support for perimenopause. So I was looking at diet and lifestyle and exercise and stress and sleep and all those fantastic things that you do to support your body through this transition. And that supports your hormones, by the way. So it's great. But when I hit 50, around about 52, my cycle stopped. Now, this was a massive change for me because I still had a cycle all the way through that. So when the cycle stops, things change slightly. So not only do your hormones go down even further because you're really not producing them on a cyclical basis anymore. You'll produce some, but it's not in the same way that you were producing them when you were having a cycle. So that changes. Now, suddenly I was waking up with horrific night sweats. Now, I'd never had a hot flush or a night sweat before, so I didn't really understand or appreciate how horrible they really are. Every sort of half an hour, I'd wake up drenched and then I couldn't get back to sleep. So my sleep was massively interrupted. I felt absolutely awful the next day because most people feel rubbish when they haven't slept. I literally can't function if I haven't slept properly. So I couldn't function in my business. I was moody. I was grumpy. I was craving all the wrong things. So my weight ballooned. Fatigue like I've never felt. And I was going for after a few weeks of this, I'm like, okay, hang on a minute. What's going on? Because I thought I had it all sussed with my natural protocols. And then I realized that, okay, no, that was brilliant for me in my 40s during perimenopause. I'm now I'm approaching this post-menopausal era, and my body's evolving. It's changing. It's going, actually, that's not enough anymore. You need some help here. I did test my own hormones because that's what we do in our clinic. I did a Dutch test and my estrogen and progesterone were very low. Testosterone was middle. So I wasn't too bad on that, but both my estrogen and progesterone super low. Cortisol was super low as well. And that's a whole adrenal history right there that I hadn't really got my head around either. But those sex hormones were low. My mama also had recently been diagnosed with osteoporosis. She finished her HRT in her early 40s, hadn't had any estrogen since then, and then in her 60s was diagnosed with osteoporosis. So not necessarily genetic, but I did not want to go down that route. She had a very nasty fracture, and it's very dangerous to be osteoporotic if you're not, dealing with it. And she didn't even know she had it. With that and with my symptoms, and I had a couple of other symptoms, vaginal dryness, which was just horrible, that was affecting my life and my relationship as well. And these were important things. So I spoke to my dad again and I said, look, Dad, I think I'm ready to try out some body identical or bioidentical, whichever way you want to put it. In the UK, it's body identical if we're going through the NHS hormones, and just see how I feel on them. And because they're completely natural, they haven't got any of the side effects or risks of the old synthetic HRT. So I was very confident, and I'd done a lot of research on that for my book as well, because I get a lot of questions, even though I wasn't on it myself. So I was very confident in the format I was going to be taking. I started on the gel, which is transdermal, goes into the bloodstream. It literally is molecularly identical to our own estrogen. So I'm literally replacing my own estrogen that was low. Progesterone we get in a little capsule that you take at night, and that helps with your sleep. It's anti-anxiety as well. It helps calm down and stimulates GABA in the brain, which is your calming hormone. So I went on this for a few weeks, and literally the night sweats just stopped for me. I felt so much better. And I tested myself a few months down the line, and my levels were back up in the normal kind of postmenopausal range, which was great for me because I felt like I was protecting my bones as well. I went off on a little story there because it's important that everybody has an informed choice about what they do to their own bodies. And I think with this divisive nature we have now in terms of HRT is the only thing you need, or HRT or natural, seems to be quite a division. And I'm very much in the middle going, okay, every woman has this amazing health jigsaw puzzle that she has to complete for herself, which is completely different to the person next to you who has a different picture in hers, different pieces. And because every one of us is so different, we have to form our own health protocols, if you like, our own jigsaw puzzle of what we're going to do. And there are many pieces that you can put in there. And that's the beauty of everything that we have available now, is there's lots of bits and pieces. And really, essentially, you have to experiment on yourself and try different things and work out what works for you. And that's all I've been doing for the last 17 years since that day, is experimenting on myself and working out what it is that my body needs, listening to it and finding that piece that works for me, works physically, mentally, and also in terms of lifestyle that's easy to sustain.
It's like a science experiment. And yeah, we are each so unique and individual. And I know from the type of nutritional therapy training that you've done, I did similar training in the UK. We're trained to do that intake, right? Where we get family history, your own medical history, lifestyle, and all of that plays a role in your own unique makeup. And it's so important. You bring up the issue of osteoporosis in your family history. And of course, yeah, you want to prevent that. Just a little bit of chiming in with my story, with the whole HRT discussion and it being seen as a magic bullet. I've heard people say, oh, it lowers cholesterol, it balances your blood sugar levels. I worry that we're using it as a magic bullet for those issues and not continuing to look at these very other important hormones like insulin, like cortisol that you mentioned in your book. I was on HRT for bone loss because I did experience bone loss, and it did the trick for me. It helped move me from an osteoporotic state to a more osteopenic state. And I'm doing all the other things, right? Yeah. Weight training, diet, vitamin D. But something that I've experienced, and I'd love to move into this conversation as we're moving into the discussion of postmenopause, something that shocked me. I was doing all the right things. HRT, all the lifestyle, all the diet, all the movement. I was approaching my 50s or moving beyond my 50s. I'm 57 now. I started experiencing insulin resistance, moving very close to the danger range of prediabetes or moving into prediabetes, and finding it really tough to manage my cholesterol levels. And I'm like, what is going on? I know that you are now working on a new book, Life After Menopause, which focuses on embracing this next chapter with a healthy body and healthy mind, and really looking at what the changes are as we pass that 1 year mark, because our bodies are continually changing and these other genetic factors come into play, regardless of whether you're doing all the right things, right? So tell us, what inspired you to write this book, and what message do you hope it delivers to midlife women?
It took a long time for me to realize I had another book in me, actually. And it was just after COVID, the pandemic, where we were incredibly busy, as I'm sure you were, as practitioners, in terms of seeing people through our clinic, because it was just a very busy time. And at the end of that, I was quite burnt out adrenally, and I had to step back a little bit for at least 2 years, but just to step back from the business a little bit and just to try and recover, because I was finding that I just mentally couldn't do it at the level I had been doing it. So I stepped back and I took a bit of time off and I did some traveling. And in that time, that slowdown, I was able to get some space and reflect. And after a little while of actually feeling better and more replenished, I had this nagging voice back in my head, and it was my husband as well, always said to me, you need to write another book. And I'm like, no, I can't. It was too hard the first time. And what am I going to say? And then it wasn't until I had this change in my 50s, not just the HRT, but the whole landscape changes post-menopause. It's now a very different place than it was in my 40s. My 40s, I was very busy with the business. My kids were still at home. My kids have now left, and there are new challenges ahead in terms of looking after bones, we've mentioned, looking after your heart, looking after your brain. These are things that will age quite quickly, and unless you proactively look after them and nourish them. There was such a bigger challenge for women post-menopause beyond hormones. We've been always just focusing on our hormones for the last 15 to 20 years during perimenopause, beyond menopause, the HRT thing. That's all about hormones. Now, beyond that, once you get past all of that, post-menopause is, you should have come to a place where your hormones are nicely at whatever level you want them to be, because some people don't take HRT and that's fine, but they'll have calmed down a bit. You get to the calm river at the end of the rapids, it should all be nicely settled without a monthly cycle. Now, yes, that can be true for a lot of women, but many women have lingering symptoms post-menopause, or they'll face additional health challenges beyond hormones. So that's when I thought, well, hang on a minute, we have so much information around perimenopause and menopause about how to navigate that journey and how to balance hormones. But what do we do now? We come through all that. Now we've got this whole, hopefully, life expectancy for women is in mid-80s. So we've got potentially 30 odd years ahead where we can transform ourselves. Maybe we can reach new heights or reach potential or do things more for us than for other people, because we've probably cared for people all the way up to now, probably have put our desires after other people's. Maybe everybody's different. But for me, it's okay, I may have another 30 years if I'm lucky and I look after myself. What do I want to do with those 30 years? How do I make sure I get the bulk of those 30 years in health? Because we may have a longer lifespan, but our health span hasn't changed in the last 100 years. So we're still, on average, globally, we're still living 50% of our lives are lived in poor health. And that's generally towards the latter stages. So longevity is a booming business. Biohacking is a booming business. Healthy aging is all there. The information is there and it's growing and it's evolving. So we need to tap into some of that you don't have to be Jeff Bezos or that multi-billionaire who's, strapping him up and testing himself every day to all these machines. None of that. You don't need to do that, but you can tap into the knowledge that's already there and make it practical. And that's what I've tried to do in this book, is to really, how do we maximize that lifespan so that we're living it in the best possible health, not just bodily, but mentally as well. We can look after our bodies, but if our brain health isn't there, then it's not going to be much fun. That is what the book's about. And I really want to dive into this research, and kind of almost selfishly too, because I want to know this stuff for myself and apply it to my own life. But also with the same mission I had with the first book, is to get this information out to as many women as possible in a way that makes sense to them in real life. It's no good saying to someone, yeah, you need to take 100 supplements to live to 100. No one's going to do that, and no one can afford to do that. It's really expensive. Or you need to go into an oxygen chamber once a week, or whatever these things are. Really advanced, super expensive things that you can do to help improve your longevity. But there are some real lessons back in the real world for you and me who just want to make the most of those extra years, and just putting some little biohacks of our own in place that make sense to us and fit into our lifestyle. And again, I've provided a lot of information, but it's a pick and mix. That's what it is. You read it all, get informed, get educated, but then pick and mix what works for you, your budget, your lifestyle, your likes, your desires, and what makes sense to you and your body. And that's what I've been trying to do with the book.
Wonderful. I want to hear more. So the focus is maintaining a healthy body and mind after menopause. Can you share any practical tips from the book that women can start implementing today to improve their overall well-being? I know you offer a whole library of options that we can pick and mix, like you said. Where do we start? I think there's so much information out there. It's difficult sometimes to discern what.
It is difficult. And it's difficult to say for any one person what to do best, because like I said, it's up to you. Experiment on yourself, try different things, and then you're going to find the bits that work for you. So I'm not going to say one thing. I've created a protocol called Embrace, because I really feel, for me particularly, I want to embrace this period of my life. It's our last chapter, without being morbid, but it is our last chapter. And I want to make it the best possible chapter out of all of them, because do you know what? We're in a position post-menopause mentally where we've really experienced, we're wise, we're strong and resilient because of what we've been through. We've experienced a lot of life. So we have a lot to give back. We have a lot of wisdom to pass on. That's where community and connection is really key. And we are a bag of resources that are vital. And yet, at the same time, this can also be fulfilling for us too. So there's a lot we can do in this period of our lives to make it not only rewarding and fulfilling for us, but really giving back and contributing to society. So if you want to, you don't have to do that at all. But I think a lot of women do feel like they want to do that. So I've created a protocol called Embrace, because I really want every woman to embrace this period of their lives. It can be the best period of your life if you let it, and if you're in the right health for it. So there's a lot about healthy aging in there, but it's also about Embrace. So the Embrace protocol I've split down. E is for eat. So it's all about eating well, eating to nourish you, but eating in a balanced way as well. Now that is not going to be rocket science, but I've split it into aging foods and healthy aging foods. So you want to balance your plate with the healthy aging foods. And I think the difference between the first book and this one is definitely eating more protein, because we need that as we get older to do so many things. Protein does so many things in the body, but particularly for our muscle mass and our metabolism. Also choosing the right carbohydrates because of the insulin resistance thing. So we're going more into focusing on the right carbohydrates. And the last one that's slightly different from earlier would be really your relationship with alcohol. So those are the kind of three things that we need to drill down on, I think, post-menopause, which might be slightly different to your dietary look in your 40s, for instance. Well, they certainly were for me anyway. So that's eat. And then M is move. And this is all about your daily movement and your exercise. And again, the difference here, post-menopausal to when you're peri, for me, is all about strength training, because we probably do a lot of cardio, or we've done cardio. We've probably done yoga and stretching, but the strength piece is where a lot of women tend to just be a bit reticent, be a bit scared, not realize how important it is to keep our muscles strong and joints strong. So that piece I've really focused on, because that is so important as we get older, to stay mobile and strong and flexible. And then the B is for balance. And that, again, we have to still look out for our hormones. So in there is hormonal balance, but post-menopausal hormonal balance. So looking at the Feisty 4, but also looking at different types of balance, like, looking at your 80-20 rule and balancing other things and cortisol. So really just looking at, okay, you may be on medication, you may not be, but have you still got any symptoms that might relate to these? Are we getting our thyroid checked regularly? All of that stuff. So that is very relevant still, but it's not the be all and end all now. It's just one piece of this whole protocol.
Can you just briefly explain what the 80-20 rule is? Because I thought that was so helpful when I read about it, because it's not all about just starving yourself and sacrificing. We do get to have pleasure. And of course, this podcast is about pleasure. So please share with us what the 80-20 rule is.
When I first started nutrition college, I couldn't face just giving up my favorite foods. And I remember back then there was coffee, chocolate, and wine were my things, my particularly red wine. And we did all the lectures on these things, and everyone said that they were really bad and they shouldn't be. We should be not eating these or drinking these things. And I'm racking my brain, trying to think of a way of keeping them in my diet. So what I came out of that with, and having seen clients as well for a decade, is nobody wants to be deprived. And actually, deprivation causes increased stress and anxiety, because then the guilt kicks in, right? Guilt just turns into cortisol, and we're already really stressed, right? So we don't want to feel stressed if we eat something that's not deemed healthy. And again, there's a lot of things that are on the healthy scale. You can have healthy versions and not so healthy versions. So I am not about deprivation at all. I think that's the worst thing you can do for your body and mind. So the 80-20 rule for me, when I read about that, I said, oh my gosh, we need to adopt this in our healthy lifestyles, because this gives us a little bit of wiggle room to have some favorite things, not feel guilty about them, not deprive ourselves. But 80% of the time, we can follow our healthy diet and lifestyle. 20% of the time, we can let go, not be worried about it, and certainly not stress about it, and not feel deprived. If you do that, you're much more likely to stick to the 80% side of things.
I adopted that 80-20 rule after I read about it in your book. And I think it's so helpful when I'm going on holiday. When I'm going on holiday, I just enjoy all the things that I want to enjoy guilt-free. That's my 20%. And then the interesting thing is, by the end of the holiday, I'm craving to go back to my 80%. I'm craving to go back to my simple meals and just no more wine, no more dessert, please. I can't take it anymore. I've had enough. Your body feels satiated from having enjoyed that 20%, especially on holiday. And then I come back 80%, I'm back and I'm so happy. I'm really loving being in my 80%, but I know that that wiggle room of 20% gives me so much pleasure, and that my body will always reset and really crave that 80%. So making it a habit then creates that muscle memory in your system, I believe.
It does. It's amazing, isn't it? And it's a lovely way to live, actually. You feel really well. And then when you have your little 20%, you might get some little messages from your body that I didn't like that, whatever you did, but you're able to hear it more easily when you're 80% of the time you're doing well. You can enjoy that thing, knowing you might have some consequences, but that's fine. You're going to be all right the following day. Yeah, I love it. And that's how I live. And yeah.
So carry on. So we finished on
B, which I will scoot through because I know we're short of time. So R is for rest. And this is the one we've been talking about, the relaxation, the sleep, the breathing properly, activating your vagus nerve, which is so important. It's that brain to gut link that it switches on your parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest, which very much gets neglected. Rest is super important, but it's not anything particularly new from stuff that we know about, but it's putting it all together so you can work out which bits you want to adopt. Okay. And then A is the interesting one for me, and I spent a lot of time researching. It's activate your protective pathways. Now, this is where we have aging pathways that we can't do anything about. They are how the body ages, including things like senescence and autophagy and oxidation. All these things are happening there. There's kind of pillars of aging, right? In the background, you don't know about them, but they're happening. Inflammation as well. There are ways, little things that we can do in our diet and lifestyle that can slow those down, switch on genes for longevity. And this is what it can get really interesting. This is the whole biohacking and longevity space is super interesting. But what I've done is I've cherry picked the best stuff and put it into some practical strategies that might work in your life, from going to having a sauna to having a cold shower, or doing a little bit of fasting, or different types of diet for different outcomes. So there are some key strategies in there that are known and scientifically researched for longevity and healthy aging. So that section is optional. You don't have to do that. Supplements as well are in there, right? So you can dip in and out of that one and go, oh, do you know what? I'm going to try. I have a sauna at the gym, so I'm going to go into the sauna a couple of times a week and see how that makes me feel, knowing that it's switching on genes for anti-inflammatory pathways and it's good for your heart and circulation and all those other things, right? So that's activate. Now the C is the next one. And I've spent a lot of time on this section because it's called connect. And this is for the mental health aspect of our life post-menopause. Because without connection to humans, to nature, to our food, to ourselves, without that connection, and we are very disconnected in this modern age, that can shorten our lives if we're not fully connected, right? We know that loneliness makes us die earlier. We know that lack of connection to nature is similar. We know that kind of negative thoughts can switch on genes for early death and inflammation and chronic disease. So the connect piece is really important. And this is something I didn't touch on in my 40s book because it didn't really, I was super connected back then. I had a busy job and we are generally maybe more connected when we're at work and we have lots of things going on. We have lots of different communities, but post-menopause, kids have left home maybe. Your friendship circles might be diminishing a little bit. You might have moved or circumstances changed, or there might have been a death in the family, or there are a lot of things that can happen that can disconnect you from others. And it's a whole section on how to keep ourselves connected, not just to other humans, but like I said, to our food, the fresh air and nature and green spaces and water and earth and all those really important things that we used to have very strong connections to when we were cave people, but seem to have lost in the modern day. But there are some really easy things that you can do to regain some of those connections. A simple thing for me that I found in my 50s that I absolutely hated in my 40s is gardening. And it may not be everyone's cup of tea, but I've suddenly found this new joy of getting my hands dirty, planting and watching things grow. I'm literally obsessed with it. And I could not have found anything more boring in my 40s. My family are really keen gardeners. And I'm like, I don't understand. I don't get it. It's so boring. What? And suddenly, like, my genes have kicked in suddenly. And I'm like loving that connection to nature. It's just, it makes me feel good. It's exercise out in the fresh air. It just really fills me up. It gives me joy.
It's wonder and awe at how nature works, right? It's the same for me. We just installed a whole new garden in our new house. And I'm like, every day I go out, I'm like, wow. It's this sense of just awe and amazement at how the world around us is so beautiful and magnificent. Yeah. And that cultivates this sense of, I am part of this. I am connected to this in some way, and I'm playing a role in cultivating this beauty and wonder around me. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing.
Gardening, it can be anything. It can be going out and just, Japanese have forest bathing, don't they? But we can just go out for a walk in the woods and we'll get that whole effect of the nature and letting it seep into our skin and our soul. So there's lots of different tips in there. And I just want people to think about and reflect what it is that they get pleasure out of. They get that feeling of awe out of, and do more of it, because it's so important.
I love that. I always say pleasure builds pleasure. So when you connect with that thing that gives you joy or pleasure, you seek more of it out. So I love that.
Yeah. The final letter is E at the end, and that is for eliminate. And this is all about your gut, your liver, and your immune system, because, okay, they may be the boring bits, I call them, but they are super, super important for healthy aging. Making sure your gut's working well, your liver is nice and clear and is not dealing with too many chemicals and toxins and alcohol and all the rest of it that it has to metabolize. And then your immune system, making sure that's strong, because a strong immune system will keep the infections away, will keep the cancers away, will keep the chronic diseases at bay. So really making sure all of those things are working well, because if they're not, you're going to be more vulnerable as you get older.
Brilliant. I love that you use this word embrace, such a beautiful word. And you're always so good at creating these acronyms and fitting all these pieces that are so relevant to our health and well-being. So well done, Nikki. When can we see this book out in the world?
Yeah, it's out now. So go for it. It's on Amazon. And yeah, I'm sure you'll put the link in if you'd be kind enough. That would be great.
Okay, definitely. And I'm going to order one, and I'll make sure to share it and show it to everyone here on the links in the show notes, as well as in the blog that I write to accompany this podcast, and in my socials. I always do a bit of sharing, and of course I have to read the books of the guests I interview. So I cannot wait to read this one. Before I let you go, we've been talking a little bit about pleasure, and this podcast is all about finding pleasure in the pause. I always ask my guests, what does pleasure mean to you?
I think I've touched on it a little bit in terms of getting outside and getting my hands dirty in the garden. I love that. The other thing for me is connection, and it's really spending time with people that I'm just laughing with. I absolutely get so full up when I've had a session out in the garden, sitting around the table, just laughing with people. And I think laughter it's another thing I've mentioned in the book, actually. It's really so good for us. No, it doesn't just feel good, but it's really good for your health. And the more laughter you can get into your day, the better. I mean, as kids laugh about 1,000 times a day, and we probably laugh about 10 maybe. That always brings me, it keeps me going for a couple of weeks, to be honest, if I have a session like that. And then I know I need so I have to refill the bucket, if you like. But laughter and getting out in nature.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Nikki, for joining us today. So life after menopause, I feel it's going to be my guide and every woman's guide for embracing our post-menopause lives with more zest and vigor and more pleasure. So thank you so much for creating this work, and I can't wait to share it with everyone. How can people find you, Nikki?
You go to happyhormonesforlife.com. All the links to both my books are on there, and loads of free resources as well. And obviously our clinic as well, if you need any help. But thank you so much for having me.
You're very welcome. And thank you so much for being with us today. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Pleasure in the Pause. Want to help me spread more pleasure in the world? Hit the share episode button and send it to a friend, or post it on your Instagram stories and tag me, Gabriella Espinosa. And if you really love this podcast, please leave a rating or review, as this helps the show get in front of new listeners. Finally, if you would like to access even more pleasure and stay in touch, sign up for my free pleasure upgrade bundle of powerful mind-body practices by going to pleasureinthepause.com. Remember, your pleasure matters.